Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Cesar Bade, your host, and this show is your regular reminder that your career matters way more than a job, and that your life is a project and you are the manager. Whether you work for a company or for yourself, your job stability is really just your ability to land your next gig. So join me in practicing intentional, planned, and value-adding relevance, starting right now. OKRs again. Objectives and key results. They promise alignment, accountability, strategic clarity, but being honest, in many companies, they just become another checkbox or a buzzword. So how do you get OKRs right? And that's what we're going to be talking with our guest here today, and he's going to help us understand. Today, I'll be speaking with Philipp Schett. He's the CEO and founder of Wave9, the fast-growing OKR consultancy that he has scaled into a seven-figure business at this point. And I think it's on track for 8. So great to hear that. But Philipp is not just another strategy guy with a framework. There's tons of those folks out there. He's an ex-Microsoft and Meta executive who's turned the traditional OKR model inside out. He has this interesting blend of German precision and American optimism, and he has led over 300 OKR implementations across more than 60 countries, from nonprofits to Fortune 10 giants with over thousands, I think 150,000 employees. He's focused on what he calls scaled productivity. Hopefully, we're going to talk a little bit about that today, in which he helps companies reclaim time, reduce meeting overload, and drive strategic work that actually moves the needle. And he's also a passionate kite surfer, from what I understand, and a music producer. So we may even talk a little bit about that today. But first, let's welcome Philipp, and let's start where most OKR conversations don't, why they fail. Okay. Philipp, first of all, thank you for coming onto the show. Thanks for being here. But you said that over 2/3 of OKR programs fail, even though the OKR framework is pretty simple. So why do so many smart companies get OKRs so wrong?
Yes, great question. And the 2/3 might be a bit biased because that's roughly the share of companies that reach out to us, and they already have OKRs, and still they are approaching an OKR consultancy with the same challenges they had before. Their teams are still misaligned. They still have a gap between their ambitions and their reality. They still don't really know how their strategy is performing. So they've introduced OKRs, but they didn't get the benefits of OKRs that they were hoping for. And why is that? So OKRs are such a simple methodology that maybe organizations don't take it serious enough. And especially when you scale up OKRs, it becomes less and less about the methodology itself, about, do we write a good objective and does a team have good measurable key results? It becomes a lot more about the process itself, and then you need to move a bit away from, let's say, a coaching mindset where you help one team develop good OKRs and put on your project manager hat on. And that's why I'm so excited about this podcast today, because that's the skill that we then need to make OKR successful at scale. And so very often OKR programs fail because they didn't take the time to develop an actual process. So they maybe heard about OKRs. They had it sounded amazing. They were super excited, and then someone said, "Hey, let's do OKRs," and then it became something they do, and that very often just ends up in chaos, because then you have 5 different understandings of OKRs. You have a ton of different ways to do OKRs, and then every team is doing them slightly different. And then another reason is that, maybe an executive said, "Hey, CEO read Measure What Matters," or another book on OKRs, and became super excited about it. And then they wanted to introduce it, but all they did was basically an email to the staff saying, "Hey, we do OKRs now," and then no one was really taking over responsibility of the project, or, and that's something we have very very often. Like they look for Susan, and Susan did a summer internship at Google in 2014, and then Susan is being asked to lead the OKR program. And just because Susan was at Google once doesn't necessarily mean that she's able to create a good OKR program, because that you had cake once doesn't make you a great baker. And so that's very often what happens. And then there are many other reasons in the detail as well. But yeah, it's often the process, the team, the training. There's maybe a Udemy course on OKRs being sent around, but organizations maybe don't invest into the right training, and then maybe they do OKRs and what we call OKR washing. So they do exactly the same as they did before, and now are calling it OKRs. And obviously, that's not going to do a lot of benefit and a lot of change to the organization.
Right. Yes. And poor Susan, who probably thought that was going to be a great opportunity for her to, maybe be more visible and have more of an impact in the organization. And now she's set up for failure because she doesn't have any support, and when the OKRs ultimately fail, then it's going to be, oh yeah, well, Susan didn't do a good job, right?
Yes, and that's often so unfair because, as you said, she's set up for failure and not for success. And if you want an OKR program to set it up for success, you need some really fundamental elements in place. And those aren't rocket science. It's not super difficult, but it is at the end a change management process. And therefore, it has a strong human element and a strong project management element to it. And therefore, you need some nuance, but also some resilience because, well, often enough, it doesn't go perfect the first time you do it.
Mm-hmm. I also find that a lot of the information on OKRs about setting up OKRs, basically deciding what they are, what the objectives are, what the key results should be. But the actual implementation, which is basically, like you mentioned, is project management of the thing, how to execute on it to ensure that these key results are being met. What does it mean to meet a key result? Do we need to meet all key results? Things like that. That's the part that's not really talked about much, right? So when a company's OKRs aren't working, I think those tend to come out like in the execution phase, but maybe I'm wrong. So are there any red flags that you tend to see when they are not working, when they come to you, hey, this is not working? What are some of the red flags that you see?
So one of the first red flags that we're looking at is the quality of executive OKRs. So we look at the leadership OKRs that the leadership team has set. And if we see that those are of poor quality, maybe the objectives are rather generic, that's a huge red flag, because if you have generic objectives at the top of the house, like make your customers happy, build great products, be a great team, increase revenue, right? Then it's really hard for the teams below that to get any information and honestly a lot of value out of that. And so that's something we look at the quality of the leadership objectives, and then we look at goal achievement across the organization as well. So that's a second red flag. And often enough, people, and I'm basically working over a Bill Gates quote, but people completely overestimate what they can get done in a quarter and what they can achieve in a quarter. And so we have the data on it, and very often in the first couple of quarters, teams achieve an average of 33 to 40% of their key results. And of course, that's super demotivating. And yes, everyone has learned OKRs should be stretch goals and OKRs should be ambitious. But if you're only achieving 20, 25, 30%, then your OKRs become honestly a wish list and the whole thing becomes extremely frustrating. So we look at the quality of the objectives, we look at the the achievement rate, and then we look at, well, the documentation and the process. So and often, very often, that's non-existent. Right? Often organizations, then we ask them, okay, how did you document how OKRs should be done in your organization? And that is very often very simple things like, where should people put their OKRs? Like, should they use PowerPoint? Should they use a Google Sheet? Should they use an OKR platform? And very often it's then, oh, that's up to the teams to decide. But you lose a lot of the benefit if you do that, right? Then you have 100 teams use PowerPoints, and those are stored somewhere in SharePoint. Then you have a few Google Sheets flying around, and maybe someone is using Jira, but you don't have any transparency across the organization. And it's very often those little things. Also, very often there are no clear deadlines. There were no clear milestones for the project itself, meaning that if it's not documented until when someone should hand in their key results or their OKR set, right? Then very often that takes a very long time. So then we know so many organizations that are still running behind the last set of OKRs when the next cohort is already setting the next quarter's OKRs, right? So it's this never ending setting of OKRs. And then also, how often should you update? Those are very often very fundamental, very basic questions that if you are blindsided by the simplicity of the methodology, you might not think about them, and then you introduce something that isn't well thought through. And then, of course, as we just said, we look at Susan, or well, a Susan equivalent, and we can then already sense, okay, is this an OKR program that's running great, or is this an OKR program that's probably not optimal? And you see both extremes, right? Sometimes the CEO tells me, oh yeah, my COO is owning the OKR program. And that's very senior, and that's that's great for leadership support, but very often that person doesn't have enough time, at least in a large organization. We're talking about tens and hundreds of thousands of employees sometimes. That doesn't allow them to go into the nitty-gritty, into the day-to-day of running a program like this. And on the other side, of course, is if we see that there's a summer intern or the most junior person you can find in the organization being tasked with this, then we know that this person will probably not be able to push teams towards better OKRs and to more outcome focus, and maybe also to more frequent updates, right? And so those are very, very frequent red flags.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I find also that it's two different kinds of professionals. I mean, sometimes you have somebody who's really good at operations, but also strategy as well. But oftentimes it might be two people. Like somebody who is owning the setup of the OKRs, like defining what they are, the objectives and things like that. And that might be maybe a more senior C-level person who has the authority to kind of, okay, well, these are the things we should be focusing on. Obviously working with the team, but somebody, the ownership of that, maybe somebody more senior, more strategic in the organization. But then the actual running the OKRs, the implementation, the reporting, that cadence, that is more like a tactical type of project management focused individual, I believe. And that sometimes I think that's the part we're missing, right? Like, okay, how are we going to run this? How are we going to collect all, like what you said, it's important to have it all in one place, for example, so we can see how things are progressing or not progressing, so we can adjust them as we go, which is it's basic project management in a way, right? Like you review your work as you go, making sure that you're meeting the milestones, and also making sure that the projects you're working on are aligned with the KRs, right? And that's a great role for for a project manager in the organization, maybe somebody with some experience already, and like you said, somebody who has enough experience that they can and is respected within the organization, so they can have some leverage with the team, so they can push and pull and guide them as time goes on, right?
100%. And we call that the executive sponsor, who is very often like the executive sponsor is often the very senior person. They are supporting the program with visible support. That's really important. It needs to be not only an email once, but frequent, continuous support. Because what happens often is that there's an initial wave of excitement. Maybe there's one training, and then the project slowly fizzles out, and maybe you set OKRs at the beginning of the year, but then already in the second quarter, not every team is doing it again, or is just copying over the ones. And that's where this visible support is of a senior person is very important. But then you need a business process owner, a BPO, and that BPO needs to be very, very much a project manager who is making sure that everyone understands how this is done. Everyone understands where the necessary resources are, what is expected from them, where can they find help if they need help, when are things supposed to happen, and also just make sure that everyone is doing their part, which in any organization that we have worked with, sometimes it's 10% of the organization, sometimes it's 20, sometimes it's 30% of the organization who are just not completely on board, or are maybe not excited about it yet, and therefore are maybe doing the bare minimum, or also happens very often are not doing it at all. And then as a project manager, you need to find your ways to sometimes with a carrot, right? Sometimes with excitement. And then honestly, sometimes with a bit of a stick where you have to find the right tone to get everyone on board. Because transparency at the end is a team sport. And in large organizations, we have found that if the number of teams silently or not silently opting out of the process becomes too big, then it's often like the broken window theory, right? When you start to have broken windows in a neighborhood, the neighborhood is slowly going down the drain, and then that's also what happens when you have too many teams not participating, and therefore you need to create excitement. And of course, I wish we could all just work with excitement, but sometimes the project manager also has to send a few reminders and be very clear about the expectations.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes there's a fear, like we don't want to tell people how to work or how to run their projects, and I think when we talk about what you just mentioned, that's some people's minds go there, like, I want to tell people how to do things, but I don't think this is what we're saying. We're just saying we need a cohesive way of, first of all, understanding what the objectives are for across the company, and OKR is a great tool to make that clear, right? Because it's simple and it's small, and also what we need an agreement on the cadence of it and how to report it, but basically, I'm not telling you how to do this, but when you do work on these things, this is what we need in terms of reporting, right? And or you need to update this file or that, and then that keeps people engaged without necessarily getting micromanaging them in the actual execution. Does that make sense?
100% again, absolutely. That makes sense, and that's again where there's a bit of finesse being required, right? It's easy to make this a micromanaging and reporting nightmare, and that's where the tool sometimes becomes dangerous, right? That's where I've seen, I've worked with CEOs, and sometimes I stopped working with CEOs that wanted to really dictate basically everything, dictate everyone's OKRs, dictate and micromanage everything for hundreds of people, which took an insane amount of energy and probably not the outcome that they were hoping for, which was an excited and productive workforce. And so that's exactly not the way it should be. But there are some minimums that we just need to agree on. Like, and OKRs at the end is a very simple syntax, right? It's a syntax for we need a way to align on the priorities. That's the objectives. And then we need to align on ways how we measure success. Those are the outcomes. And then we need a way to manage our actions. And that's then our projects. And we often even call that OKRA, objectives, key results, and actions, because that makes it even a bit more clear what key results are, in the sense that they aren't just your task list. But that's, again, that there are some minimums that we need to agree on, and otherwise we're just not really getting the benefits out of OKRs, and we are not as aligned as we could be, and as we probably should be.
Cool. Let's talk a little bit about scaled productivity. You talk about what does that mean, and how do OKRs help drive it?
Yeah. So at the end, I'm not dogmatic about any methodology. Like, okay, yes, for some reason that I ended up creating an OKR consultancy, and we did 300 plus OKR projects, but I was never excited about OKRs. It's not the methodology. It's what I'm excited about is scaling productivity. And so productivity is something that we often think about on an individual level. Like, there are so many self-improvement guides. There are so many guides that say, hey, you should wake up at 5 a.m., do your ice baths and do your to-do list and all of those little things. But that's of course great. And that's not really scalable. As an organization, I won't tell my employees to take ice baths, and I don't expect anyone, and I don't say anyone should. So then there are some tools on, well, how to be a better leader for one team, right? And that's great. But there are just not too many frameworks for how we can create productivity at scale. And productivity, again, for me, means to get better and more reliably from aspiration to outcome, to reality, right? And I want to do that. I want to move from aspiration to reality as efficient, as lean, as productive as possible. And OKRs can help with that, because they're first of all our shared language of productivity. So again, they help us make sure that we use the same language across an organization if we are talking about what we want to achieve, how we measure it, and then how we move forward towards that. And that alone, I mean, of course, English is the language of choice, but that's not a language where we align on, okay, that's what we mean with, that's our priority. And so that's something that we do. First of all, we introduce this shared language of productivity, and then as a second step, we introduce what we call results rituals. And these results rituals are, again, productivity at scale, and that's where we make sure that every team does at least the basics, right? And that's very often a short Monday meeting, and teams can, of course, vary that, and teams have different agendas, but at the very least, they should have a team meeting where they calibrate and assign the work that needs to happen in a certain time frame, most often weekly. And then we introduce something that we call Friday Celebrate. Some organizations do it on Tuesday Celebrate. I like that as well. But for me personally, I prefer the Friday Celebrate. And celebrating is, at the end, we update our OKRs. It's a bit of a euphemism, but it is celebrating that progress that we make. And then we introduce a shared framework for the business and ops reviews, where we have streamlined agenda, streamlined meeting preparation, streamlined meeting um, facilitation, and streamlined follow through. And then we also introduce a framework for one-on-ones and performance check-ins, so that managers have a guideline on how to do a productive one-on-one. And again, that doesn't mean that it's micromanaged to the T, right? That's not what we do, but we do give some guidelines on, hey, first of all, you should do one-on-ones because it isn't always happening, especially maybe outside of tech organizations, where we work a lot with incumbent organizations that don't have that management muscle and that management rigor that you might see in some Silicon Valley and tech organizations. And therefore, we are introducing one-on-ones, and we are making clear that how to use OKRs in one-on-ones, because OKRs can then again quickly backfire if you use them wrong in your one-on-ones. Because if you say to the organization, hey, everyone should set stretch goals, and then everyone is setting ambitious goals, but then you're punishing people for not achieving those stretch goals, right? Then you just destroyed all of that, all of that trust maybe that you've built. And so that's why it's so important to have a framework how we can scale productivity from just like your self productivity into a team, but then into a whole organization. And that to your point of, yes, do we prescribe how people run everything? Well, again, only to a certain degree. But if there are common denominators across the organization, like, okay, a team meeting has roughly this structure. On Fridays, we all update our OKRs. A one-on-one follows roughly this guideline. Then it's just easier to collaborate across functions, and it's just easier to work together and break up those silos.
Right. That's great. So it's like a holistic approach to the entire organization, because you need to know, your why you exist as an organization, and then what the goals are, what the outcomes that you're looking for, which are tangible, nouns. They're not verbs. How's, it's just the what are you trying to achieve, and then the goal then becomes, how do we achieve that in a way that uses the least amount of resources, right? Which comes, that's when we talk about, being productive, being efficient, and OKRs just aligns with that, because it kind of addresses all those things, right? Especially if you add the A at the end.
Yeah, 100%. And the A is actually something that we deduce more and more, because again, we are in OKR dogmatics, and we have just found that the A at the end makes it so much clearer, and also eases up a lot of resistance. A lot of resistance to OKRs very often comes from the fact that people are sometimes a bit lost, because I love my to-do list. I love managing with my to-do list, and hey, most people do, right? Most people love ticking up some boxes, striking through if you have pen and paper, right? And just achieving something. And maybe OKRs are telling you, oh, that doesn't matter anymore, because now it's just about objectives and key results. And that's not really true, right? The tasks still matter. You still need to get work done, but you need to also make sure that work actually moves the needle, and that's where the KRs come in. So that's why we are in more and more projects are talking about OKRA, which also, of course, is the plant, right? That we know from food, and so there are some good good infographics to make with that, better than about OKRs.
Right. So you also talk about that transformation requires friction, right? So how do you manage that tension that comes with the change that you're proposing? Because people are, like you said, they're gonna resist, or they're going to, sometimes even worse than resisting is like working against it, right? Undermining it. So how do you manage that tension?
That's a great question, and it's it's a very case by case situation because resistance has many different faces, right? It's different if your executive team isn't on board, right? Then of course, like if a CEO introduces it and then there are six C-level executives telling him or her that yeah, no, that this is a terrible idea, then that's a different situation than if there are, let's say, a few lower level or middle managers not on board. And then also it depends on the type of resistance. So not too often there's super visible resistance like that it happens, right? And sometimes people are not in favor of transparency, and I get it, right? That's um not everyone loves transparency, but um but very often it is more silent resistance, and then it that introduces a lot of friction. And what I mean with resistance is that yeah, people are slow in filling out everything and slow in or not doing it at all, and or are just are doing it wrong, but are saying, "Oh, I'm not really understanding it," and so then you have key results that are just task list, right? And then you have to have this awkward conversation with someone explaining to them why that's not really great key results, and that's so, and then it depends, right? How you deal with that resistance. But let me start with the first thing that we always do. So first of all, we we tell a CEO that they have to sell, not tell the organization why they're doing OKR. So you have to start with a very strong case of why you are doing OKRs. And your case shouldn't be, oh, all of our peers are doing it, and for some reason we should do it too, or Google is doing it, or I read this book. No, there are certain benefits of OKRs, and also certain expectations like the transparency, maybe the cross-functional fact that you can set OKRs cross-functionally. But you, as an executive making the decision, or as a team lead making the decision to introduce OKRs, you thought about that hopefully for some time, and you maybe read a book, you maybe spoke to a few consultants, you maybe spoke to a few peers, and now you've decided, okay, I want to do OKRs. That process took you a while. And if you only tell people now that, oh yeah, we are going to introduce OKRs, you're expecting them to make the same leap in their thoughts, like the same, yeah, this cross the same chasm in, well, in 5 minutes, in which you are telling them that we are doing OKRs now, right? That is very difficult to expect from anyone. So as a program team, or as an executive sponsor, you have to sell, not tell. And then once you solve that, and once you have a very strong case, you need to be, again, then very strong and very resilient in repeating the same message. So that means you have to make your case, and then you have to repeat your case. And then when there's an executive team that isn't on board, then of course we do very individual conversations where we listen to their feedback, where we maybe, and very often that feedback is rightful. It is most often not really against the methodology, because the methodology is very simple. It is just about, oh, maybe they don't feel ready, or maybe they don't feel prepared, or maybe something else is going on. And then we listen to that, and then we include that in our process description and in the way we run the program. And that's crucial that we take that feedback to heart. But then, of course, there are sometimes a super small percentage of people, like one in 100 to maybe one in 50 or so, like 1 to 2%, that are just like are just playing the Grinch, right? And are just not really on board. And very often, this is this is not really the thing that are on board on. They are just, in most cases, they are just frustrated about something else with the organization, and this is now the thing that they rally against. And that's something, again, a bit case by case, but sometimes it helps to be very, very clear that this is now the way, and that's why we need the executive sponsor. This is now the way that we align on how we talk about priorities and how we talk about the metrics that we measure success with. And honestly, we aren't expecting, like OKRs aren't expecting too much from someone, right? It takes honestly not too much time to set them. It takes extremely little time. It should take extremely little time to update them. Yes, they are transparent, but yes, that's so that should also be okay with, because we, as an organization, we need to know which cards we have in our hand to play the best deck, right? And so that transparency is just a requirement for us to be as good as we can as an organization. So again, how we deal with resistance depends a bit on the type of resistance and where it's coming from and how many and why. But often enough, you need to sell, not tell, and and then you need to repeat that, and you need to stay the course. That's why also OKR pilots are so often a terrible idea, because if you tell someone it's a pilot, then why should they lean in? It's another pilot, it's another exercise, it's another test run, and test runs barely work.
Awesome. Yeah, I like that. Especially the when you mentioned that the 1 and 2% of people who are just grumpy, or the Grinch, as you said. And I think that if you tried to implement change in the past, the first time you try to do it, you're very optimistic, and you think, because you're convinced that OKR is a good move, for example, that everybody's going to see it the same way, right? Then that doesn't work, and then gain a little bit more experience in implementing change. Then what I noticed that a lot of people become discouraged, because they remember the resistance, and then they swing the other way, and they think, okay, everybody's now that 1 to 2% folks who just resist for the sake of resisting. And you mentioned here that there is nuance. It's usually it's a spectrum there, but first and foremost, you need to communicate, right, and explain why we're doing this, and communicate that regularly, frequently, to the point that you're probably tired of hearing yourself say it. But as they say, right, once you get tired of hearing yourself say it, that's when they starting to understand, right? So keep at it, and then deal with the resistance individually, I suppose, and try to get to the root cause. Okay, why is this person not collaborating or not cooperating? And if it is, if it is with that 1 or 2%, it's not the OKR's fault. There's, like you said, there's always some other issue here that is bringing dissatisfaction. And then you deal with that appropriately. And in fact, you would have to be dealing with that regardless if you're starting an OKR program or not. That was going to be a problem anyways, right? So I think I like that. It's a nuanced approach, right? So it's you can control the communication and control like how often you talk about it, and how you sell it, like you said. How individuals will buy it or not, that's case by case.
100%, and that's where the repetition comes in, but then also the smaller forums. Right, at the beginning, you might have a big town hall where you where you present the program, and sometimes you have thousands of people in those town halls dialing in and or coming in person. And that's where you communicate it the first time, you create some excitement. But then it's important that you have smaller groups of training sessions or ask me anything sessions where people are asked have a forum to ask their questions, and are and where you and and that's also important for me to highlight. It is not the fault of someone who is not convinced to be not convinced. Like, of course, I'm convinced about OKRs, but A, yes, I do have a commercial interest, right? So yes, I'm biased. B, I am yeah, I have done it 300 times. I've seen the success 300 times. And so it's not the fault of a critical person to be critical. It is then on me and the program team to put in more work to convince them. And 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 very often you need to then invest into your first followers. So that's really, really critical. You need to identify the ones that are excited, the ones that see the benefit of this, and then you need to really invest in them. And they will then just take most people along with that change. And so if you do the opposite and you don't invest into your champions and you don't invest into your followers, and you're only investing into your time only into the critiques, and are maybe getting into those heated discussions and often enough emotional discussions, then A, you're going to be tired, and B, you're probably also not going to be super successful. Of course, you need to invest some time with them, but don't forget your champions, and don't forget the ones that are really excited about this.
Now, what does a great OKR champion look like, and how can they support, like, let's say, a company-wide rollout?
Mhm. So the OKR champions are different people, and we love to have a mix, because some OKR champions are good project managers, and that's great. And so they are then responsible for making sure everyone in their department every team has a good set of OKRs. The OKRs are always up to date. So that's where you need good project managers, typically with like at least 3 to 5 years of professional experience, and maybe 1 or 2 years with the company, so that they understand all those three-letter acronyms and can really, really help the organization. But then it's also good to have, yeah, some some people with a bit of a stronger following in the organization, that are maybe a bit more charismatic leaders, and make or are good in facilitating a workshop, right? And that can be a helpful bunch of people too, because you need to set OKRs, and that most often happens in an OKR workshop. And then you are yeah then you are and then you need to have those people around too. Of course, in the ideal world, you would have great project managers that are great facilitators and great public speakers and all of that, right? But in reality, you need to build your village, because it really takes a village, and you need to build your support team. And therefore we look at different uh, different capabilities, and then also different seniority levels. Like, the ideal person isn't a C-level executive, because those are not good workshop facilitators, even if they could facilitate the best workshop. A workshop with a C-level executive that are in a level 3 or 4 team, that that would be a big fly on a wall, and that's typically not the best way to facilitate a workshop. So you need some seniority, but if it gets too senior, right, then you're in risk of just shaping the discussion too much. So that's not ideal. And then you want to have a good mix of departments too. So some organizations make the mistake, in our view, to only have HR people become OKR champions, and there should be some HR people for sure, but this shouldn't be purely an HR driven initiative. This should be a company wide initiative. So not only HR, not only IT, not only product management. It should be a mix of capabilities of project manager, of facilitator, of public speaker, and of someone who knows numbers really well, because that's like some analysts that can really crunch the numbers. And then you need to have those across the organization.
Awesome. Great. Now, there's debate over, especially when it comes to KRs, right? Like output versus outcome. So just to get a little bit more tactical here, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but maybe can you share an example of let's say, a poorly written KR and how to maybe fix it, how to change it so it's better?
Yeah, of course, of course. So a poorly written objective. Let's start there, right?
Okay.
A poorly written objective is an objective that doesn't inform any choices across the quarter. So it is something that is maybe true, and yes, should be true, but it isn't informing our choice. So a bad objective is something like excite our customers. Okay, cool. That's good. If we don't do that, that's then that's bad. But that's more a category, right? And so you should really say it should be a lot more time bound and a lot more specific than that. So maybe it is exciting our customers with our new AI functionality. Probably still not a great objective, but it would be better because you're making it a lot more specific. So that's for the objective. And then a key result, well, most often the bad key results are a couple of different forms of bad key results. The most frequent one is your key result is actually a task. So you say something like, okay, we record 50 podcasts. And so, okay, great, you do 50 podcasts. You never publish them, or they are published. No one's listening. That's not really what we are going after, right? So a better key result is maybe reaching at least a handful of people and actually helping them, right? So that may be a bit more difficult to measure, and you would maybe need a proxy like viewership or feedbacks that you get or questions that you get afterwards. But then that's better than just doing the task. And then again, we come back to Okra, recording the podcast or shipping a product or launching a feature. All still very, very, very important. But if we don't agree on what is this feature going to do, then we're probably optimizing for the wrong thing, or we are probably maybe we are doing the wrong things, or we are doing the things in a wrong way. So maybe maybe a podcast wouldn't even be the best solution. Maybe it's an individual session or whatever our goal is, right? So then that really depends. And then there are many other examples of bad key results that are tasked. But then there are also many other key result types that aren't very helpful. So most often that's so frequent. It's increase something by 10%. And then you ask them, okay, where is it right now? And you know how many people know their numbers? It's a shockingly low percentage of people that know their number when they said, okay, we should increase it by 10%. That's happened so often. So it's a very, very tactical tip, but you should absolutely be sure, instead of increasing something by 10%, you say, okay, we increase it from 500 to 540 or 550 or whatever your goal is. But you should absolutely make sure that you know how to measure and where the data is coming from. And very often when you do that, then the team is suddenly saying, oh, but no, I meant this as the 10%, as the baseline, right? I meant we count all sales. No. I thought we only count sales in North America, or only in our ICP, or only only when we are profitable or whatever it is, right? Then you need to be very, very, very specific. And so I think that's my general comment on OKRs. People are sometimes scared of making them too specific, about making the objective too specific, about making the key results too specific, about making it in general too specific. And it's the contrary that I recommend. Make it as specific as possible, and you can always make it less specific, but an unspecific goal doesn't help you over the next time frame, because then you're just having the discussions and unclarity along the quarter.
Right. As somebody once said, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there, right?
Yes.
All right. So if, somebody listening right now, a project manager or not, right? If they want to start using OKRs with their team, what's the very first step they should take?
Be clear about your why. So why do you want to introduce it, right? What is the problem you're trying to solve? And so, and that should be very clear. Like, is it team engagement that you want to increase? Is it clarity that you want to increase? Is it accountability that you want to increase? So what's the problem you're trying to solve? And yes, there's sometimes a true problem that you want to solve, and then there's a publicly facing problem that you want to solve. I get that sometimes you can't really name the true problem, but you should still be clear about your problem, and then also about your pitch to the team. And then then of course, if you're new to the methodology, then take some training in it. It doesn't need to be much training, and we have some free training available if people are interested. So that's probably a good second idea. Be clear about your why, do some training in it, and then start. If you want to do it with your team, maybe just do it for one specific problem or one specific new topic. So instead of trying to do all-encompassing OKRs, you maybe only do one or two sets of OKRs for one specific topic. So AI might be a good topic for now. Let's set some OKRs in our organization around AI and align a few teams on it. And so starting small doesn't only mean you start maybe with yourself, or maybe you start with only your team. It can also mean start with a very specific problem, and a very that's new, but that way you need to experiment a bit, and then that could be a good use case for OKRs. And then do it, keep learning, keep going, and then learn from it and expand as you go.
Awesome. Philipp, thank you so much for your time today. This is so interesting and so educational. If people want to learn more about you and the work that you're doing with OKRs and other things, where should they go?
Yes. So you can follow me on LinkedIn via Philipp Schett, or you can go to wave9.com. That's wave9, all written out, not the number. Mm-hmm. And then it's wave9.com. That's our company.
Okay, and I'll have links to your LinkedIn and to wave9.com on the show notes for today's episode, which everybody can find on pmforthemasses.com. Philipp, again, thank you so much for your time today. I hope you have a great weekend there in Berlin, and maybe I'll have you back soon and we can talk about the next topic. Now we implemented some OKRs and things are kind of going off rail. What do we do? Maybe we can talk about this at a deeper level next time.
Love that.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.